Welcome back to Books and Beyond with That Guy Jay. I am, of course, your host, That Guy Jay. Real quick, before we jump into today's episode, if you could just take a quick second to like, share, comment, subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, maybe leave a 5-star review on one of the podcasting apps. It helps the algorithm a ton. I appreciate the support so much. And thank you again for tuning in. This week is going to be a solo episode. I am wearing orange because it is CRPS Awareness Month, and orange is the color for CRPS. I have mentioned several times on the podcast before that I have CRPS. I've gone into it a little bit, but I thought given that it is CRPS Awareness Month, this would be a fantastic opportunity to dive into this topic a little bit more, explain my journey with CRPS, and more importantly, get into the things that I wish people understood more about chronic pain. Most of this would also apply to chronic illness, but this is just my lived experience and me talking about some of the things that affect me on a daily basis with this injury. I guess we should start with what is CRPS? CRPS stands for Complex Regional Pain Syndrome. It is a neurological disorder and it is usually tied to either an injury or a surgery. In my case, it could be one or the other, or perhaps both, but I will get into that a little bit more in just a moment. But yeah, CRPS is a chronic pain condition which usually starts after an injury like a broken bone or surgery, but the pain lasts longer and is much stronger than what you would expect from the original injury. CRPS most often affects an arm, leg, hand, or foot. In my case, it is my left ankle and my left foot. One of the things with CRPS though is that the symptoms can actually spread to other limbs that are not associated with the original injury or surgery. What are the symptoms of CRPS? What actually does it feel like? Symptoms can vary widely by person. It can be a different experience for everybody, but the most common symptoms are pain from even a light touch or a breeze, persistent swelling in the injured limb, skin that feels either very hot or very cold, just generally a change in temperature in the skin, change in appearance of the skin. It can look thin or shiny. It often ends up discolored. In my case, it often ends up a very purplish color. It can also have muscle spasms, weakness, and atrophy associated with it. I have atrophy in my left calf. Overall, my left leg is smaller than my right because of this injury. And in terms of treatment, there is no cure for CRPS. For some people, it does clear up in time. For others, it actually gets worse. And as I mentioned, can spread to other limbs. And there isn't a ton of treatment available other than trying to manage the pain with medications. There is physical therapy and some lifestyle changes that can be made to try and work with the CRPS. But overall, there's not a great solution for people who end up with this as a long term thing, such as myself. The way that I ended up with CRPS is I originally injured my ankle in March of 2017. It's not a fun story. It's not an exciting story. I just took a bad step. That's the reality of my situation is unfortunately one wrong step off of a curb into a dip in the road that I just didn't see, and it completely altered the course of my life. What ended up happening was I rolled my ankle pretty severely. I caught myself on the back of my work car. I was walking back to my work car after going to out I should probably mention I was an auto damage adjuster at the time, and I was leaving a body shop, and the manager that I needed to meet with was not there. So I was updating my work calendar on my work phone to show this and not really paying attention and took a step off of a high curb behind my car and didn't realize that there was a slight dip in the road. I wouldn't even call it a pothole. It was just like a nice dip. And my ankle rolled. I caught myself on the trunk of the car and pretty much instantly, I knew it wasn't gonna be great, but I got in the car and I drove about 15 minutes to our main shop to go have lunch with some of my coworkers, and I kind of limped in and told them what happened, and I took off my shoe and sock to assess how bad this was, and the swelling was pretty instantaneous, and I put my shoe back on quickly because I realized that it was gonna swell so much I wasn't gonna be able to get a shoe back on. This led down a kind of silly process within my company where I called my manager to let him know that I was going to be leaving for the day. but I was instructed I had to call this 1-800 number first and speak to a company nurse and follow their instructions and only leave if they said it was okay. And I told the nurse what was happening, and she told me to immediately go to an emergency room, which was already my plan. So that's what I did. I went to the emergency room and I was given one of those boots that you've seen people with and told to follow up with an orthopedist. They did x-rays, nothing was broken that they could see. There was a ton of swelling though, so they said that I did need to follow up. And this is kind of where this journey goes a little bit negative for me. I can't say for sure if this altered the overall outcome of my situation, but it did prolong treatment. The initial doctor that I was referred to was one that worked with my company. He would have been considered, I guess, a workers' comp doctor. And he kept stringing me along and having me come in every week and kept telling me that it was just a standard sprain. But after about 7 weeks, the swelling hadn't gone down. I had zero stability in my ankle. If I tried to walk without the boot, I was instantly going to roll my ankle. And I pushed for an MRI, and I finally got him to send me for an MRI. And upon getting the MRI, I found out that I had an avulsion fracture, which is where pieces break off of the end of a bone. I had full tears in multiple ligaments and tendons, and my ankle was just a mess overall. This doctor still told me that it would heal on its own. He said that it was just a bad sprain. And at that point, I asked for a second opinion. I went to another doctor who, within moments of actually physically examining my ankle, told me that we needed to talk about a potential surgery. And that's what I ended up doing. It took some time for all of this to get approved through the insurance companies, and everybody knows what a nightmare that can be. So the injury happened in March. I got the MRI about 8 or 9 weeks later. I saw the second doctor at around 3 months. So I think that put us in around June of 2017. And I ended up getting the surgery the very last few days of July. Going into this surgery, the doctor told me that my expectations were probably about an 8 to 12 month recovery. He said that my ankle would never be 100% the same, but he could fix the stability and that I would, in theory, go back to living a normal life. He said I'd probably never be running a marathon, but that I would be walking and basically living my life as it had been before the injury, maybe some slight limitations. The surgery came and it was supposed to be about a 4-hour surgery. And I woke up in the most intense pain I've ever felt in my life. I've had multiple surgeries. I've been in pain before, and there was nothing like this. They actually had to resedate me because I was in so much pain. And when I finally woke up in a room, it was almost dark outside, and the doctor finally came to see me. And that's when I found out that the surgery was actually 6.5 hours. This was a situation where when they went in there, he said that there was a lot more damage than what the MRI even showed. There was a lot of torn cartilage. There was a lot of gunk that they had to get out of there. They actually ended up adding a tendon for stability. So I have a cadaver tendon in there held in place by titanium screws. And I spent one night in the hospital, and he had me in physical therapy about a week later. I obviously couldn't do much. There was massive swelling. I was in a cast for about a month, but they had me doing some physical therapy things just to be moving and trying to get strength in the rest of my leg. They didn't want me to atrophy there while I was waiting on the ankle. And I was set and mentally prepared for probably 8, 9, 10 months of physical therapy. I knew it was a long road ahead of me, but that's all I was focused on. I was going to physical therapy initially 3 days a week, maybe four, I forget. And I started to see improvement. I got out of the cast. They got me into a walking boot, and there was pain associated with this, of course, still, but I was walking with the walking boot and I was doing the physical therapy. And then we reached around 6 months post surgery, and I started to plateau. It took a lot longer to transition from the walking boot to no boot because of excessive pain levels. And I eventually did get out of the boot and into a normal shoe, but I still had to wear a type of brace that they custom made for me. And yeah, I kept going through the motions. I went to physical therapy. I did everything the doctors were telling me to do. And the pain just really wasn't getting better. And I wasn't able to walk without aid. I was initially on crutches, and then I worked my way down to one crutch. And I eventually worked my way down to a cane. And if I'm honest with myself, there's probably a lot of days where I should be using a crutch, but I just don't because I am stubborn and they get in the way and they are very annoying to use. But around the 8-month mark is when the doctor started mentioning that I may have some long term issues. I started seeing a pain management doctor at this time, and this is also when they started mentioning CRPS. I had never heard of CRPS before. I had no idea what it was. I would imagine that a lot of you who don't know me and don't know this about me have probably never heard about it either, which is why I want to share my story during CRPS Awareness Month. I think that spreading any information about this is good. I think that people knowing more about these types of things is helpful for those who have this condition, and just great information for people to know in general that this is something that people are going through. But anyway, back to my story or journey here, if you will. I started seeing the pain management doctor, and he ended up recommending a sympathetic nerve block, which is where they take a very long needle, and I believe they use a CAT scan machine right next to you or an X-ray machine, and that's actually how they keep taking pictures of where the needle is going, and that's how they find the correct nerves. And the point of this is, it's essentially a nerve block. It's supposed to get to your nerves in your spine and block the nerves going to your lower extremities so that you no longer feel pain. It's also supposed to help with swelling. And for a lot of people, this does help. I saw next to zero results. I had a slight reduction in swelling, no change in pain. And we ended up doing this 3 times over the course of probably about 6 weeks. And at this time, the pain management doctor told me that he could not, in good faith, continue to poke me in the spine and cause me so much discomfort without any results. He basically said that this was the end of the treatment line for me with him. He kind of wished me the best and apologized for not being able to do more. I was also at this time taking gabapentin, which is supposed to help with pain, but I unfortunately had a side effect with it where it made me extremely drowsy to the point where I wouldn't have felt safe driving, and I could essentially only take it at night. They had me taking a big dose at night to try and help me sleep and to kind of hopefully have some effects the next day. I didn't really notice a big change with that. They also had me using Voltaren gel, which at the time was prescription only. It is meant for people with arthritis. It's a topical cream that you put on that is supposed to help with this type of pain. Again, I didn't notice any difference. So, by about 1 year after the surgery, physical therapy had told me that there was nothing more they could do for me. My pain management doctor said there was nothing more they could do for me. And my doctor told me that he suspected CRPS and that there wasn't a whole lot that he could do for me either. And this is about the time that I realized that this was no longer going to be recoverable. And the level of pain and the level of mobility I was at 1 year post surgery was likely where I was going to stay forever. And possibly it could get worse. This was an extremely difficult thing to come to terms with. And from here, I was also still dealing with my employer. Workers' comp was sick of me. They wanted me off workers' comp. They eventually got to a point where they had me seeing a new doctor every week. They were trying to find a doctor that would say I was able to return back to work, or that I don't even know what they were looking for, but that got old quick. I saw a lot of doctors in the span of a few months between my regular appointments with my surgeon and the workers' comp doctors. I'd probably seen a dozen or so doctors, and they pretty much all told me the same thing. One doctor was pretty blunt with me, and he just flat out said, "I'm really sorry. The only thing that's changed with your condition in the last 20 years is the name. They used to call it something different. Now they call it complex regional pain syndrome, and there's nothing I can do for you. And I'm very sorry." Eventually, this did lead to a settlement with workers' comp. I got a little bit of money. It was not nearly enough to live the rest of my life. It wasn't even enough to live for a full year. So this kind of became a panic time in my life of trying to figure out what was going to come next. This, if I'm being completely honest, did lead to a pretty deep depression. Uh, I would say it took years to kind of emotionally work through this realization and this new path forward, this new life journey, if you will. Um, as I said, I do walk with a cane. I can technically walk. My amount of walking is very limited. I can't walk great distances. Standing too long hurts. To be honest, sitting too long ends up hurting as well. And from there, it's kind of just been a struggle of trying to figure out what to do. I can no longer work a traditional job, unfortunately. I have just been doing kind of side hustles where I can. I've had eBay stores, Amazon stores, different types of reselling. I've had a little bit of luck with that, but nothing that's enough to really get ahead in life. And that gets us through the first couple years. And the 5 years since then have kind of been just more of the same. And all of this is, in a roundabout way, what led me to content creation. I found Book Talk in 2022, and I was getting back into reading as a way to distract myself and just trying to have a hobby because I spent a lot of time alone in my bed. I still spend a lot of time alone in my bed because laying down is usually less painful. It's not zero pain, it's never zero pain. That's one thing that I've kind of struggled to have people realize is I don't know what zero pain is. I haven't since March of 2017. I forget what it's like to just wake up and not be in pain. And that's something I'm gonna talk about in a little bit as well when I kind of get into some of the things that I wish people understood better about those with chronic conditions such as CRPS or chronic illnesses. But I started watching Book Talk content. I got a bunch of great recommendations. In 2022, I blew up my TBR. I learned what a TBR was. I had never known that term before. And after about a year of watching content, I kind of started to realize that there was a real book talk community and I was kind of outside looking in and I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to feel like I was in a community again. And I came up with the idea to make content because I kind of figured that connecting with people and joining a group of book talk creators was by becoming a book talk creator. And I've talked about this before where my first attempt was just a couple videos using audios where you show certain books on your bookshelf, and then there was a big gap where I did nothing. I eventually worked up the nerve to do a voiceover. I hated doing voiceovers, they were very difficult for me. So I finally just said, "Screw it." I sat down on the floor in front of my bookshelf. I propped my phone up against something on the coffee table, and I started making my first book talk videos. And I quickly met a great group of people who were new to book talk as well, and I'm still friends with a lot of those same people. We're all in the same circle on book talk, if you will. And eventually I came up with the idea of creating this podcast, Books and Beyond with that guy Jay. My main goal for this was trying to spark my own fire for life, my own passion, find passions again. I spent years grieving the loss of every hobby I've ever had because all of my hobbies were very physical. I was no extreme athlete or anything, but one of my biggest hobbies I've talked about many times was walking. I loved walking and exploring New York City. I'm not originally from New York, been here since around 2008, and I absolutely love New York City. And I would go to new neighborhoods. I would usually have a camera. I loved photographing the city. I just loved trying a new pizza place, trying a new coffee shop, just going to a new park. That was my absolute favorite hobby. It sounds silly to some, but I absolutely loved it. And I would just go for a walk sometimes, go walk for an hour or 2, and obviously, that's not an option anymore. I used to also be into biking. I had a fixed gear bike, and those were super fun in the city, if anyone is familiar with those. And I love to whip around on my fixie. And I did work out. I For a while I was running and doing stairs with a friend as he got ready to take the FDNY test where he had to wear a weighted vest and do I don't even remember how many floors of stairs, but I would go walk stairs with him. We would go for runs. I was just kind of training alongside him as I was trying to get in shape back then myself. Even my jobs were physical in the sense that, like, I worked in retail sales for 5 years, which required standing for 8 hours a day. I was in EMT for a while, which is obviously quite physical. Even working as an auto damage adjuster, which was my most recent job, the one I got injured on, That required me walking around junkyards and being able to walk and crouch and move around a ton. And all of these things were gone. And I've never had an office job, so that wasn't really something that was available to me, nor do I have the ability to sit for 8 hours a day. So I just felt very lost. And one of the things I noticed on Book Talk and in on TikTok in general is everyone who's into reading also had something else they were passionate about, and they usually would share it in some of their content. And I absolutely loved seeing the different hobbies that people were into, or the side jobs that people had, or the main jobs that people had. And I felt a great amount of sadness because I truly felt like I didn't have anything in the world that I was passionate about. I mean, I'm pretty passionate about being a parent. I absolutely adore my daughter, but that's not really a hobby. That's not something that can last forever either. She's 16. She's going to leave me someday. Um, so I felt like I needed to find a hobby. I needed to find a purpose. I needed to find a passion. And I thought, what better way to discover new passions and try and become more passionate about things myself than having a podcast. Because as great as Book Talk is, you can only communicate so much via comments or DMs or videos back and forth with others. Podcasts are a very unique way to have long form focused conversations with different people. And Book Talk is full of creatives. And I've had some amazing guests over the last 43 episodes. This is going to be episode 44, I believe. And it's been amazing to talk to people. And one of the things that content creation and especially creating this podcast has taught me is I really enjoy making content. I think that I do have a passion for content creation. I really have enjoyed improving and learning about lighting, improving my audio. I'm always trying to get the best video quality I can. I got a camera for my birthday and I've been practicing, recording videos with that. And the goal is to eventually have multiple angles here, not just recording on my phone through an app on the internet. I have a lot that I still want to improve with this podcast, but I look back to episode 0 where I talked about the podcast to now, and it's a massive difference. And I've really taken a liking to creating content, and I've really taken a liking to being an interviewer. I think that I'm fairly good at it. My family, my extended family in particular, used to always joke when I was a little kid that I talked too much. So maybe podcasting was perfect for me. Maybe this is what I was meant for all along. It took a pretty life changing injury for me to ever consider creating content. That part's super unfortunate, but here we are. And so that is as abbreviated as I can get with my story of how I ended up with CRPS. And now I just want to talk to you a little bit about what this looks like every day for me as someone with chronic pain and kind of get into some topics of just things that I wish people understood better about chronic pain and chronic illness in general. So, as I mentioned, I can't walk a ton. I do spend a lot of time in my bed. And this has created a situation where I don't want to be this way, but I have to be this way. The rare times that I do get invited to things because it's been so long of me being a homebody, I really have to weigh my options. And a lot of times my answer is maybe. And it's not because I'm trying to be a jerk, but my life kind of depends on how I wake up each day because I don't know how I'm going to wake up each day. I can wake up tomorrow and it is a very bad day and I'm not leaving the bed. That's where I'm going to be stuck for the day and that's going to be my reality for the day. So when I tell people maybe, I'm not trying to be non-committal. I'm not trying to say no to your events because I don't want to be there. I'm not trying to say no to any activities that anyone wants to do, but I just don't know what tomorrow brings for me. And another sad reality of this is I really do have to weigh the pros and cons. And this sounds harsh as I'm saying it, but I have to decide if what I'm about to go do is enjoyable enough to potentially have an awful tomorrow. Because standing, walking, even being in the car for too long as a driver or passenger ends up really uncomfortable for me. My ankle is going to swell even just from sitting. I elevate my leg a lot when I'm in bed to avoid this, but even that doesn't work. And the reality is that if I am at an event where I'm standing and doing my limited amounts of walking, tomorrow's gonna suck, and the next day might suck. And it's often worth it because I don't wanna spend my entire life alone in my bed. I do wanna go do things, but I really kind of have to weigh my options here. And I do really hope that those in my life understand this. I think some do and some don't. But I don't just have the freedom to say yes to something 2 weeks in advance and guarantee that I'm gonna be there. I can't do that anymore. That's no longer a reality for me, and it's really difficult. And this kind of ties into another aspect of the injury and how others perceive and interact with my injury, and I kinda just wish people understood why I'm not more open about my pain. It's been years of well-meaning suggestions, and I do think that people come from a place of meaning well. But things like, have you tried yoga? Have you tried CBD oil? Have you tried acupuncture? Have you tried this doctor that I heard about? When I've already exhausted all of the medical options, every suggestion kind of ends up feeling like a way of reopening this wound. I have to reface and re-grieve for the life that I had and the life that I lost. Because I have had to grieve. I've had to grieve the life that I thought I would have. And it's a reminder of the permanence of this injury. And I have to continually explain to people that there is no fix. And I have spent years trying to grieve this. And this wound constantly gets reopened when people have these never ending suggestions. And again, I'm not trying to be offensive when I say this, and I know that with most people, it's coming from a good place, and it's just difficult because I could see over time the change in people's eyes. Initially, after the surgery, "How's your ankle?" "Oh, it's improving." The normal things, and then for a long time, I did give honest answers when people asked how my ankle was, and I would tell them how bad the pain was, and I could see them kind of checking out and not being as engaged in this part of this conversation anymore. And it kind of sucks because I feel like, in doing this, I'm protecting my own feelings, but I'm also having to kind of manage other people's feelings and expectations, and that's the part that I wish people understood. And that's why when people ask about my ankle now, I just say I'm fine. I'm fine is an easier answer than having to go into the details about how I'm actually feeling. And another part that is very difficult is I appear fine. I don't look sick. I don't look injured. When I have a pair of pants on, you can't see the surgery scars. You can't see the swelling. Just because I have an invisible condition does not mean it's not a real condition. And this has been difficult at times because more so with strangers, I appear fine. And this leads to a lot of awkward conversations of, oh, why do you have the cane? Oh, you're too young to have a cane. Especially when I initially got injured, I believe I was 33 years old walking around with a cane. And that was difficult as well because every time someone said that, and I ran into this in my old building a lot with, neighbors. I didn't know them well, but I knew them well enough to say hello in the elevator and just have, neighborly chats, and it's like, "Oh, you're too young for that," and every time I wanted to be like, "Don't you think I know that? Like, who do you think you're telling? I know I'm young. I know I'm too young for this by standard expectations of life, but this is my reality," and it just it was painful and it got old. And it's something that I still struggle with because when I meet new people, having a mobility aid like a cane is instantly going to bring up questions. And I don't mind answering. I also walk with a heavy limp. People are going to figure out that there's something going on. But it can lead to uncomfortable situations because, again, meeting someone new to circle back, it always ends up with, like, oh, did you try XYZ? Sure did years ago. I did try it. I tried everything. I also I forgot to mention this earlier, but I tried injections directly into my ankle and foot. They were some of the most painful things I've ever experienced. Getting a needle in the bottom of my foot that ultimately didn't help, I don't want to do that again. And I think that related to the invisibleness of this, I think people with chronic conditions can all relate to this part is If you see me out and about laughing and having a good time, it doesn't mean I'm better. It doesn't mean I'm cured. And it certainly doesn't mean that I'm pain free. I don't want to live my life alone in bed. So I do push through the pain occasionally to try and go do things. I do try and still have activities that I enjoy. They're a lot more limited to what they used to be, but I still like to have them. And just because you see me out laughing and having a good time occasionally does not mean I'm better. And it does not mean that I'm not in pain. That's another thing that I wish people understood. There is no such thing as 0 pain days. I kinda said that before. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself at all, but I'm just trying to let all these thoughts out. Podcast is certainly good for that, but my base level of pain is probably around a 4 or 5. I've just gotten very good at masking because I kind of have to. I have to try and fool myself a little bit, and I just don't wanna walk around constantly with a pain face. I don't wanna constantly be grouchy about the pain, although internally some days I am. But my base level is pain. I don't know 0 pain, and I have moments most days I have moments of 8 or 9 on a pain scale, and I have a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale quite frequently. I've been woken up from a dead sleep with a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale. I get this very sharp, stabbing, electrical feeling pain directly into my ankle, shooting out towards my toes. Um, and that leads perfectly into one of the other things that I wish people realized about chronic conditions. It affects absolutely every aspect of my life. It affects my sleep. I saw a statistic recently that something like I think it was more than 60% of people with a chronic pain condition also have insomnia. 8 out of 10 people with a chronic pain condition suffer from depression, which is something I've struggled with myself. It affects my work life massively. As I said, I lost my career. I lost any potential future careers that I was interested in for the most part. That's something I'm still trying to work out and figure out how I'm going to pay for the rest of my life. One of my hopes is eventually monetizing my content and this podcast. This is something I can do from home. This is something I can do on my schedule. And that's also a big part of why I've leaned into this so hard. And I'm really trying my hardest to make this be a thing. Like I said, I've had some fantastic guests. I think I've had some fantastic episodes. I'm still just trying to learn how to promote and get more eyes on this. So, another shameless plug if you want to share with somebody, it would mean a ton to me. It also, as I've mentioned with all of this, it greatly impacted my social life. It's impacted my parenting abilities at times. I've had to not be as present at times because of the pain. I've had to miss certain school functions. It's absolutely impacted my own self-worth and how I view myself. I think as a society, sometimes we have pretty negative views about the disabled. I don't even know if I consider myself disabled. This is something I've struggled with as well. Do I have a disability? Am I disabled? Am I handicapped? I don't know. I don't have an answer for those, and my own feelings about those words shifts you know, sometimes day to day. I usually say I have a disability. I have an injury that caused a disability, but what does that mean? And how does that impact me as a person? Like, these are all part of the overall struggle. And literally, what I mean by it affects every aspect of my life, it affects every decision I make within my life. It impacts who I am. It affects my mood. I try really hard not to be negative and grouchy, but some days I don't win that battle. And one of the biggest issues that it created for me was isolation, just a massive amount of isolation. I spent a lot of time in my room by myself. And by a lot of time, I mean years. There was a few years like 2019 and then COVID kind of gave me an example to pull back even further from life because COVID in New York City got pretty crazy. So I spent about a year home. I rarely went outside and I used COVID as the cover, but a lot of it was just kind of sinking in the darkness of the permanence of my pain condition. And I think that I wish people understood the amount of grieving that is required with a chronic condition. I've had to grieve so many different things in so many different ways, and it's ongoing. I think that I probably would have assumed before this happened to me that at a certain point you get over it. But I think it's like death. You can grieve someone's death and you may recover, but you never forget. And the feelings are always there. You just learn how to interpret and handle them differently. And that's very much been the case with my injury. Like I said, I grieve for a life that I didn't have, but I wanted. I've had to grieve for the life that I did have, even though I wasn't content with where I was and I had goals and ambitions. I have to grieve the loss of that. It's just kind of a constant grief cycle and trying to figure out how to work past it. And I think as a society, at a certain point, people do expect us just to get over things. It's like with death, most times, eventually, people expect you to get over it. And you don't always. And I don't think anyone ever truly does. You just, I'm working towards acceptance. And most days I'm there, and some days I'm not. And I can only speak to my condition. And like I said, I wanted to spread awareness for CRPS because before a doctor told me that I potentially had this thing, I had never heard of it. I had no clue that this was even a possibility. I had no clue that this was a thing. It's it's relatively rare. I believe there's only like 50,000 new diagnosed cases a year in the US, which is a lot of people, but out of the massive population that we have, it's not that big. It's not super well understood. Doctors don't fully know why it happens. Some people end up with this without a direct cause. They don't have any injury that could have caused nerve damage or surgery. I'm not one of those cases. Like I said, did my initial injury cause this? Did delay in treatment by that first doctor cause this? Did the surgery itself cause this? I will never know. And I've accepted that. And I kind of don't care. For a while, I was upset about it, but I don't think it matters how I got here because regardless, I am here. And ultimately, the doctor did do his job. My ankle is fixed in the sense that he completely fixed the stability issues. He removed the pieces of bone that were in there. He fixed all the tears in the tendons and ligaments. My ankle, my left ankle, which is the injured ankle, is technically stronger than my right ankle. I don't think I could ever roll it. I have a little bit less mobility in it because it has an added tendon that's a little bit tight. So in that sense, it is fixed. It's just the cards were not in my favor in terms of essentially what is nerve damage. And I don't know how it got there. I don't think it's any fault of the doctor. Maybe the initial doctor who delayed treatment, but like I said, I'll never know. And I am not going to spend my energy worrying about that. I can't change it. I ultimately don't think that there's anything I could have done different in terms of treatment. I know that I did all of the right things in recovery. I didn't skip physical therapy. I did the exercises at home. I went to physical therapy 3 days a week for nearly a year. I believe it was 10 or 11 months. I did all the things. Every suggestion they had for, like I said, injections in my ankle, spinal injections. I've done it all. Um, I'm a little heavier than I would like to be right now, but after the injury, I even lost weight because at the suggestion of others, maybe if I weighed less, it would hurt less. It didn't affect it at all, in fact. Some of my worst pain days were when I was probably at my thinnest, if you will. I do wanna get back on my weight loss just for overall health, but I don't have any expectations that it will make my ankle feel any better. I don't think it will. I don't think anything will. I think my life at this point is very much about managing pain to the best of my ability, take advantage of the good days, and hunker down on the bad days, disappear into a fantasy world with my audiobooks, with my immersive reading. That's something that reading has been fantastic for on really bad pain days. I am able to distract myself a bit with books. Some days the pain is too much and I can't really focus, but those are not super common. Most of the time, I can pretend that I'm not at a 6 or 7. I've gotten very good at dealing with pain. I've gotten very good at masking. Most of the time, you won't know. The only time you would know is if I take a bad step. And the way I describe a bad step to people is that I'm gonna take a step and it's gonna be a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale, and my leg is gonna kind of like the way I describe it to people is if you imagine grabbing a hot pan, you're instantly gonna pull your hand away without even thinking about it. I kind of do that with walking, and that's why I need the cane and I probably should have a crutch because every now and then when I go to take a step, I just have to lift my leg real fast. And it's a subconscious thing. I don't mean to do it. It just hurts so much that I instantly can't put weight on it. And the issue is I say that those steps are probably like, I don't know, on a bad week, every 1 in 100, but I don't know when they're going to be. It could be 1 in 1,000 or it could be five in a row. I don't know. And that's why I have to limit myself, but really that's the only way that you would know that I'm in any discomfort. I have just learned to mask, and I think it's better for me mentally as well because I just try and not focus on the fact that I'm constantly in pain. And I think I can wrap it up there where the last thing I wish people knew is that this is just a constant struggle and a constant battle for people with chronic conditions. Even on our good days, it's in the back of our mind. We're worried about it. We're worried about if it's going to turn bad. We're worried about if people can tell. I said it's invisible and there's negatives to it being invisible, but there's also negatives to having it be visible. I don't want people to see me struggle to walk or have a pain face or see that I'm visibly hurting. That's not very fun either. I'm a socially anxious person. Maybe that's part of it. I don't want that kind of attention. Hope that I was able to articulate all of this well. I don't want any of this to seem like I'm making accusations against people who don't have chronic conditions for not understanding. I don't want this to come across in any way as confrontational. I just think that there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who have chronic pain conditions and chronic illnesses. And I don't think that as a society, we always do the best job of being understanding of their feelings and their situation and what they may or may not be dealing with that day. Like I said, my whole goal with this episode is awareness. I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey, how I got here, why I am here, why I'm on a podcast telling you this to begin with, and to teach people a little bit about a condition that I knew nothing about before I had it. I hope I was able to accomplish some of this today. This is difficult for me to talk about. This is way more vulnerable than I usually am. Um, I haven't talked a lot about my condition in the past. I've tried to do a better job of that on TikTok this year. This is the first year that I have ever even acknowledged CRPS Awareness Month. I've known it was in November. I've never said a thing. I've never done a thing. Trying to change that. If you've made it to the end of this podcast, I genuinely greatly appreciate you for sticking around and hearing me yap about all of this. I appreciate the support that I've gotten on this podcast so much. I will be back again next week with another episode. I have some fun guests lined up in the coming weeks and months. And as always, I will see you again next week. And if you could like and share one more time, real quick, I'm trying to get this out into the algorithm. I would greatly appreciate it. I will see you next time.